What does your softness barometer measure at these days? What does my softness barometer measure at today? You're being soft. That was a phrase that we would often say to each other growing up, usually coming from my brother or a cousin or a friend. Sometimes giving encouragement, like trying to, on the bench and trying to maybe get one more rep on the bench. Don't be soft, let's go, one more. Or maybe after complaining or taking the easier route, it's, dude, Mark, you're being soft right now. From time to time, I notice that I still use that phrase. Actually, I use it all the time. A recent time is just this past Thursday, second half of the Bears game, where I found myself saying, Mitch, you're being soft right now. We need you to not be soft if we're going to win this game. He was soft. I'm afraid the church in some ways has turned soft. I'm afraid there's not a small number of us who have turned Christianity as something that is soft. And Christianity is anything but soft. Soft Christianity, when that's promoted, it doesn't have very good results. It's not attractive, and it's certainly not something worth fighting for. So I think we need to go back to giving tough Christianity a try. Even if for no other reason, it's because it's what its founder demanded when he laid it out. And so the gospel today, we hear, begins by pointing out that there's a great crowds that are following Jesus. Probably mostly because it's coming off the cups of him doing miracles and performing and healing people. So there's a great crowd of people. And the gospel says when Jesus sees the great crowds, he turns and addresses them. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't look out at the great crowd and says, yes, this is great. Look at all these people who are following me. No, he doesn't get excited. Rather, he gets skeptical. Jesus is suspicious of large crowds. Wait a minute. I'm not so sure you're all supposed to be here. Are you all in the right place? And throughout the gospel, actually, it mentions large crowds numerous times, and every time you hear the gospel mention the fact that there's large crowds around Jesus, buckle up, because there's about to be a hard teaching coming. It's almost as if Jesus smells out, when he sees the large crowd, he smells out to the fact that there's many people in this large crowd who have begun to follow him, that many are in the crowd that have the wrong idea of what he's laying out. They have an idea of soft Christianity. And so the entire gospel that we read today is Jesus laying out the conditions that are necessary to be his disciples. And they are extreme. And they're not for the soft. So I propose that Jesus is inviting us here this afternoon to check our softness barometer. How soft are you? How soft am I? Not according to what I think, not according to the crowd, not according to what's convenient for me, but according to what he lays out. And so let's look at three things. The first, don't be soft by not putting him first. And I know I've been preaching on that a lot these last number of weeks, but it's because Jesus is stressing this point in the Gospels. Today he says, you must hate your mother and father, brother and sister, your wife, husband, even yourself. Otherwise, you can't be my disciple. Jesus just said that. It's important to see what he is saying and what he isn't saying. We could look at a number of different spots. Just look in 7 chapters earlier in Luke chapter 6 when he tells us who we should love. He says there in chapter 6, if you love those who love you, what credit is that for you? For even sinners love those who love them. So love your enemies. So is Jesus saying, love your enemies, but don't love your mom and dad? Or some of us may remember that there is a commandment out there that says, love and honor your mother and father. So does Jesus just contradicting himself? Did he kind of like, oops, made a mistake there? The word here for hate, our Jewish brothers and sisters, when they heard that word, meant something like loving less. So Jesus is saying to you, to me today, if you choose to follow me, you must love less your father, mother, brother, sister, children, friend. So just pause there and think of your mom. Think of your dad, your brother, your sister, your child, your friend. And ask yourself, do I really love Jesus more than them? Notice the shock level is still pretty high. At first we're like, well, Jesus says to hate your mother and father. Unless you hate your mother and father, you can't follow me. Well, now we see what he is saying. The shock level's still up there. This is not part of a winsome speech that one gives. In fact, after Jesus addresses the large crowds that are following him, it's pretty safe to bet that after he's done, that crowd dwindles drastically. And it may be the case for some of us today, here, this afternoon, that it's the very first time that we're really understanding of what it is that Jesus is asking. And we walk out here today saying, I don't know about this. It seems a bit much. So I'm done. How's your softness barometer doing right now? How's mine? Secondly, don't be soft by not making a decision. When he turns and addresses the large crowd, the very first word out of his mouth is this: if anyone wants to be my disciple. Meaning a decision to follow him must be made. He demands it. And for those of us who have grown up Catholic, we've grown up in the church, we're cradle Catholics, the pull for us to not make a decision is really strong. I'm Catholic, I'm doing this because it's how I was raised. It's what mom is, it's what dad is, it's what grandma and grandpa are. But as I said before, you can't be a disciple. Jesus says you can't be a disciple, you can't be Catholic, you can't be a Christian solely because mom is, because dad is. Rather, it requires a decision. And we're seeing maybe a new level of the softness barometer happen or take place today. It was last year Bishop Conlon, who meets a few times a year with the newly ordained. So he gathered maybe 15 of us, 20 of us last year, and I remember as we were all there, he said that for the very first time in the history of the church, we're beginning to see the faith not passed on from one generation to the other. In 1960, 80% of Catholics went to Mass on Sunday. Today, it's 20%. Parents are deliberately choosing not to sign their kids up and take them to religious education. We're seeing that throughout, not just here at this parish, not just in the diocese, but nationwide. There's something just over 1,000 kids from ages 6 to 13 at this parish. Half of them are registered for religious ed. And also small things, little things like taking a crucifix to a 2-year-old child and saying, "This is Jesus who loves you and died for you on the cross, that rescued you so you could be with him forever in heaven." It's happening less. The faith is being passed on from one generation less. So parents, don't be the reason why your children are soft. That is to say, don't be the reason that leads them to making a misinformed decision. They may make a decision not to follow him as they grow older, and they may make a decision not to follow him. And some of us here in this church this afternoon are painstakingly aware that that is the case, and you feel it every day. Just ensure that they aren't choosing not to follow him because what they've seen modeled for them is a soft Christianity. Third and lastly, don't be soft by not feeling the cost. Jesus says in the gospel, "Whoever wishes to be my disciple must pick up his cross and follow me." Then he goes on and gives 2 short little analogies or parables saying that no one sits down to construct, or no one constructs a tower without first sitting down and planning out to seeing if they have enough materials to finish. Or no king sends his men into battle without knowing that he's got a shot to win the battle. Both of these parables or analogies are to strive home the point to be sure that there is an extreme cost and sacrifice to all of this. And really, it's the story up and down salvation history, a general life lesson that we all know that if you're committed to something, you're not committed to something unless you're willing to sacrifice for it. If committed to something, you sacrifice for it. If I'm committed to my spouse, I sacrifice for her. If I'm committed to my children, I sacrifice for them. If I'm committed to becoming a better athlete, a better basketball player, a better golfer, then I sacrifice for it, and I feel it. I feel the cost. Sacrifice and commitment are one and the same thing. To be his disciples, we must be committed and we must sacrifice. So a question for us this afternoon may be this: how do I feel the cost of my discipleship this afternoon? How do I feel the sacrifice of being a Christian? And don't say, I come to Mass once a week for an hour. Judge that mentality with what Jesus is saying in the gospel today. He says it's going to cost you everything. So looking out at the crowd, we can imagine Jesus being done and saying, do you still want to be my disciple? What's your softness barometer at right now? Some of us may be sitting here right now thinking, my softness barometer is reading a little higher than what I would like. I know that's what I was thinking this week as I spent time with the gospel. Or maybe some of us are even here, if we're honest, engaging against Jesus' words today, are thinking that my softness barometer is actually on the verge of breaking. For all intents and purposes, I'm a practical atheist. I don't have an intentional prayer life. I never open up the Bible. I've never really made a decision to follow him. I've never really made the decision to put him number one in my life. My life's a mess. My relationships are a mess. Jesus is not the center of any of them. And if that's us this morning, the Lord says to us, let's go. Let's get to work. Leave the crowd. And make a decision today to follow me, to ante up. A new beginning starts today for all of us. We can begin, and the Lord looks upon us, and it's just going like this. And it will be difficult. There will be great sacrifice and great commitment. And it will cost you and me everything. It will cost you your life. But in losing one's life, it is then that we will register a 0 on our softness barometer.